Now it's time to take some questions from some of our schools that are out there. Thank you so much, Arwa. All right, and don't forget, continue to send in, buzz in, send those emails to the address on your screen, and we'll continue to answer questions throughout the day. Okay, our first question is from Turning Point Learning Center in Emporia, Kansas. And the question is, can you describe the differences between honeybees, wood bees, and bumblebees?
If you go to the Discover Life website, you can go in there and click on these bee guys. Honeybees are an introduced species. It's Apis mellifera. It's introduced. They live in large colonies. They're somewhat striped like this, but not quite like bumblebees. Live in much smaller colonies. They're very important pollinators. Wood bees or carpenter bees, solitary, we will definitely get some photographs of those, and you can tell those because they've got a shiny abdomen.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. And our next question is Mrs. Winter's class, third grade class from Seneca Valley, Pennsylvania. How can we safely study bees without hurting them?
Bees, if you don't bother the bees, they're probably not going to bother you. And so you can go out in the field and just observe them, just take photographs of them. Generally, don't grab them. If you grab a bee, it's likely to sting you. But if you can actually put your finger out there, the males don't sting, males don't have a stinger, only the females can sting, and you can actually put your finger near a bee, and as long as you're not poking it or squeezing it, it's probably going to leave you alone. So they're actually nice things to study.
Yeah, if I poked or squeezed you,
I would sting you back.
That's right, that's right. All right, so let's see. Here's another question from students at Cornerstone Learning Community in Tallahassee, Florida. We watched a baby bee hatch, and its wings were soft, and it didn't want to sting us. How do baby bees learn what the adult bees know?
They're genetically programmed for a lot of their behaviors. They obviously can learn. They have a bee language, so they can go out and communicate where flowers are, in the case of the honeybees and so on. When they're coming out of the cocoon, they start doing certain tasks on the nest. They're nurse bees generally, and as they get older, they then would, in the case of the honeybees, start foraging and going out and so on. So they're learning and communicating with each other. They've got pheromones which communicate. They've got this dance language, and they're pretty smart creatures.
Very much like people.
Yes, exactly.
All right, and our next question is from Mrs. Dreyer's class at Priff School in Waretown, New Jersey. Do carpenter bees pollinate?
Carpenter bees do pollinate, but they're also robbers. That they will go in on most flowers. Carpenter bees will drill a hole in the side and suck the nectar out, and they're nectar robbers. But they do on passiflora. They will actually pollinate, and the flower comes down, the bee goes in there to get the nectar and stuff, and there's these things on the flower that come down and put the pollen on the back of the bee. So they're sort of a very specialized pollinator of passiflora.
Do they have the pollen baskets as well on their legs?
No. Oh, hang on. That I don't know. That's a question.
That was my question. All right, and next we have Sarah from Grapevine, Texas. Can you keep bees in a backyard in a city?
You probably can, yes. They fly a long way. Bees can fly 3 or 4 miles to get food. So if you're in the city, you can have bees. You've got to be careful that the neighbors don't complain, and you don't want to put it near a walkway because then people might get stung. But you can certainly look after bees. And you can, I've even seen them in buildings out of windows where you'll have a hive in a building window and the bees are flying out from the 3rd or 4th story.
Right, actually in Washington, D.C., we have a hive on top of one of our buildings. Okay. So they can be in a city. Next we have from Rialito High School in Rialito, California. How much of the U.S. native bee population became extinct due to the introduction of the European honeybee? And are U.S. bees continued to be threatened by the import of foreign bees?
we really don't know what impact the European honeybee has had on North American bees, because it happened when the colonists first came over. They brought these bees and they just took over and so on. They clearly have an impact on lowering the numbers of the native bees, but whether they've actually caused extinctions, it would be hard to say. Probably not.
Okay.
And the threat, and this is of not just bees, but the importation of foreign organisms into this country often introduces diseases. And so at the moment we've got mites that have been introduced in the bees, and the bee populations are threatened by these exotic diseases. But you've had things like the chestnut blight that was introduced by the horticultural thing, and then we lost 3 billion chestnut trees. So the importation and invasion of different species is a major threat to our local native flora and fauna. And we've got to be very careful about that. So if you've got pets that are foreign snakes and stuff, don't just release them outside. I mean, they've got horrible problems with snakes, boas in the Everglades
Or
at the moment,
actually,
and so on.
pythons.
And pythons,
Yes,
and
pythons.
so on.
Well, and two, that can happen with plants, correct? Because some plants are exotic, not necessarily invasive, but other plants are really invasive and can...
Right, and
Okay.
I mean, and there's definitely real problems with invasive species coming in there, and they often do extremely well. And they're brought in, for example, English ivy. I mean, it looks like it's nice, but it then gets out in the wild and it just basically chokes out everything. So you really don't want to be gardening with these exotic, and particularly the exotic invasive species. You want to be using native wildflowers,
And
or species that don't go.
And we saw many of those today with the previous example of pollinator partners. All right, our next question is from Frog Pond Elementary School, that's pretty cool, in Little Egg Harbor, New Jersey. And the question is, how far into the U.S. have the killer bees from Mexico traveled?
They've not gone into the places where it gets really cold yet. They're mainly in the Texas and the southern states, and they'll probably eventually be limited. It's not like they're going to get to Canada.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Arwa. And this is from Mrs. Jones' class in Florence, Alabama. How do bees find their way back to their hives?
They've got a memory, and they use the sun to navigate, and they find their way back. I mean, they're pretty good at finding places.
All right. And so, do we have one more question that we can answer? Thank you, Arwa. This is from Mrs. Flippin's class from Sparta Elementary in Sparta, Missouri. Do all bees have the same life cycle, and do they die after they sting?
Some bees die after they sting. Others don't. I mean, depending on the species, they all have the same life cycle. They start with an egg, then they're a larvae, then they're a pupae, and then they're an adult bee.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pick.
Okay, well, it's a real fun pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
You.
And that's all of our time for all the questions.